Hello and happy Wednesday. Welcome to the Boilermaker Lounge. I am Sam Sprunger, as always, joined by Grant Flora, but also joined right from the get-go by our buddy from Sports Illustrated, Dustin Schutte. Grant, Dustin, how are we this Wednesday?
Doing pretty good. It's been a good week, just given the fact that we know Purdue's going to have a nice game, a nice matchup on Friday. So getting ready for that.
Dustin, have we talked a little bit before we went on, but you tired?
just a little bit. Now, the one benefit was, I got Purdue had the late games at the Big Ten tournament. We turn around, they get the early games in the first round of the first two rounds of the NCAA tournament, and now they've got the dreaded 10:09 tip-off, and now
10:09 Eastern.
And their SID has said basically it's going to be 10, like plan on 10:30 because it's not going to be done by 10. Like they're not going to take the floor at 10:09. So
only if there were zero fouls called, basically, and they played the fastest game ever. But let's talk a little bit about those games that, from what you saw from Purdue. There were things that many doubters went into this tournament saying, look out for High Point because Purdue's not playing their best. High Point is playing a pretty darn good season. And then against McNeese as well. What did you see from Purdue that they have changed since, or at least improved upon?
I thought it was interesting. That first game against High Point, I thought looked very similar to basically how the last month of the season went. So those last 9 games, they had lost 6. They had gotten a halftime lead. It's 10 points. And you're feeling pretty good because they ended the half on a strong run. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, well, they've played well in the first half. They built big leads in the second half when they kind of let them slip away. And within the first 4 minutes, McNeese goes on a bit of a run. It's a 4-point game. Purdue pushes that lead back out to 9 points. And at the snap of a finger, it's a 3-point game. And you're like sitting there thinking, oh boy, not again. Like this isn't going to happen again, is it? Because we've just seen it so frequently over the last month, over those last 9 games where they had a good lead, they were playing well, and then just something happened. And I'll tell you guys, I don't know if this was evident on television or not. There were a lot of High Point fans, not a bunch of people that were cheering for High Point, like actual High Point fans. Yeah. Yes. And so I thought, maybe the magnitude of the situation, having that many fans, but to me, they weathered the storm better than they have in the last month. And I thought that was really impressive. Like Trey Kaufman-Renn hit that turnaround, fadeaway jump shot that looked impossible, made it a 5-point game. They get a stop. Braden Smith gets a layup. And then I think they got a miss. And then on the next possession, the ensuing possession. So then Braden Smith hits a 3. And basically from that point, it was game over. And it almost felt like from that point, their confidence jumped up tremendously, like because they didn't give McNeese a chance in that second round game. And that's the kind of team that you want to see Purdue be in those type of situations. Is just, you know what, we're going to hit the gas early. We're going to go up by 20 points and we're not going to relinquish it. And so I was really impressed with how they performed in that second round game, but just a thorough, impressive all around. I think there were different things you liked about each game. The fact that Cam Heide got a double-double in that first game against High Point. He was crashing the glass with some tenacity there. Will Berg came in off the bench, lightly used Will Berg, and gave him 10 really solid minutes, especially defensively, I thought. And then Jakari Harris, CJ Cox had their moments. Miles Colvin had some incredible plays. So this is what you needed. This is what we talked about all season. When people said they're losing Zach Edey, Lance Jones, Mason Gillis, it was like, okay, but they've got the big 3 returning, and you got a veteran in Caleb First. You got 2 really athletic guys in Camden Heide and Miles Colvin. This was the kind of depth we expected to see from this team, and maybe it just took a while and it's starting to kind of shine through now. But as we all know, the tests are going to get a lot tougher from here on out.
You mentioned Will Berg. Real quick, is it possible, or maybe I don't know, did Coach Painter plan on him having some presence in the tournament, so that's why he started doing the offense for defense subbing?
So it's interesting that you asked that, because I actually asked that question in Friday's interview period. I said, this may be my untrained eye, but it seems like you've been doing a lot of that offense-defense substitution between Trey Kaufman-Renn and Will Berg, and maybe throw Caleb First in there a handful of times. And I said, has that been by design? Has that been foul trouble? What's kind of been the reasoning behind that? And he said, basically, Trey getting in foul trouble has been the cause of that. He said, now sometimes it may just be he has that one foul, but we don't know when that second foul is coming.
Right.
And so it's better to protect him in the way that Will has been playing defensively. They feel comfortable enough to go in there. And to me, he didn't say this, but this is my perspective. Will Berg has 5 free fouls. Like if he goes in there and picks up a foul, who cares, right? Like you don't want him to get an and one or anything like that. But if somebody's going to get called for a moving screen or trying to block a shot or whatever the case might be, why not let it be Will Berg? You'd rather – basically, I think that's what he was saying. Like if we're going to get that other foul, we would rather have it on Will than we would Trey Kaufman.
Oh, for sure.
So I think there's a little bit of that, like we want to protect Trey because we need him so badly on the offensive end. And at the same time, we feel like defensively – Will is giving us a level of rim protection. He's giving us 5 fouls, and he's actually been playing pretty well in those, snippets that he's been playing at the end of the season.
I was going to say he was a plus on the plus minus scale for those games. So yeah, he had a couple of in his perspective or our perspective of him, he had 2 really good games.
No, I completely agree with that. And like, I think you go back to the Michigan State game, and I think he played all of 2 minutes in that game. I don't remember what the final number was, but on the defensive end, I think he came in and got a block. The USC game, I think he got a block. Like he's come in and whether it's been 90 seconds or 9 minutes, he's made some contributions that I think he doesn't get enough credit for. And it's really hard. Painter talks about that all the time. Like it's really hard to just come in, play for 90 seconds and play really well. But he's done what they've needed him to do in his allotted time on the floor. So I think that's been a net positive for Purdue here down the stretch.
Yeah, well, and I think also just you think about Sam and I have talked about this on the show, but Purdue these last few years has done a nice job in the postseason of bringing in these guys that maybe saw some DNPs during the Big Ten season, weren't necessarily guys you saw on the scouting report, but they come in and they make a big impact, whether it's only a handful of minutes or not. Just making some of those plays and kind of changing up the lineup, the rotation to really help them and throw a wrinkle in there that other teams aren't necessarily ready for. And I think this year it's been Will Berg. In the past, it was Miles Colvin or even like Brandon Newman a couple of years ago. But I think that's a really smart thing to do from a game plan standpoint, just to change things up in March, to give you a little fresh look so that teams don't know exactly what you're going to do. I don't know if you've noticed that same thing, Dustin.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The Brandon Newman in 23, I mean, he was the reason they basically won that Big Ten tournament.
Right.
He came up and gave them some really good minutes off the bench. So yeah, that's a really good point and something I had not thought about. So that was a really good observation. And I don't know. I think maybe in the regular season you kind of roll the dice at times with Trey on the floor, and with the finality of March, like it's win or go home. So if we can't, and I think Painter knows at this point, like we can't afford to have Trey Kaufman-Renn in foul trouble, right? So I think that they're more comfortable, and I think in that first game against High Point, now it could be wrong. I think he had 2 fouls at like the 10-minute mark of the first half. I might be misremembering that, but it was fairly early in that game. He picked up his second foul, and that's why Will Berg played so much. And so I just think from that standpoint, I think they do. Oh, you're good. I think they feel comfortable bringing Will in those situations. And like I said, he's done a really nice job. Now he may not get the credit. He may end the game with a bunch of zeros and 3 fouls in those columns. But what he gives them in terms of rim protection, I mean, like there were 2 defensive possessions right in front of me where he just stood straight up and got called for fouls. Like it was a little wild, right? But like he's doing everything he needs to do. So I do think that there's a element of surprise. And when he's in there, at the very least, he gives them a 7'2" body that other teams aren't expecting. And like I said, that if nothing else, just give them a foul so they don't get a layup. Purdue's interior defense throughout the season has been its biggest Achilles heel. So if nothing else, just contest the shot. And if you foul somebody, right? Just don't give him an easy look when he's in the game.
And that's what I was kind of thinking is, we're watching in the Big Ten tournament, they start doing this regularly, where they started doing the offense for defense. And it made me think, holy cow, now he's doing it right in the tournament. He was doing it to get them into rotation to where they understood and felt comfortable with that type of play if they needed to. He's playing chess and we're all playing checkers.
That's why he's one of the best coaches out there, man.
Yep, absolutely. So move to Saturday real quick before we go on to some other topics. But Saturday, you were right. This game, it was a 14-point win, but it Purdue punched these guys in the mouth so many times early that they didn't have a chance to get back up.
Right. And it's funny because, and I don't want to pat myself on the back, but I'm going to pat myself on the back. We were talking, my colleague and I, we were kind of talking, and he said, how do you feel about tomorrow? And I said, I feel really good that Purdue's getting McNeese in round 2. Because, sometimes when you look at March Madness, those lower seeded teams, and I know that they were really athletic and they were really skilled and they had all the aura or whatever, but a lot of times those teams use up a lot of their energy, their mojo in that first round game. And I think that's what happened to McNeese. Like sometimes they're just not as good as and to me, I knew McNeese was good, but I just didn't think they were worthy of I don't know, some of those other double-digit seeds that have gone on runs. I just didn't think they were that skilled. And so I was like, I think if Purdue had played them in the first round, I would have felt very nervous about that. Sure. I think that they could have dealt a first-round upset to Purdue. But I felt much better about it in the second-round game. And like you said, they just came out and punched them in the mouth. By the time they had called the first media timeout, all 5 starters had scored. So 4 minutes into the game, all 5 starters had scored. Mm-hmm. By the 7-minute mark, then Camden and Miles had both scored. So you got 7 different Boilers that have gotten in the scorebook already, and we're only 7 minutes into the game. And I think even though it was 20-8, I was like, this game's done. You just had that sense that Purdue's going to do whatever it wants offensively. Mm-hmm. And they were just frustrating the hell out of McNeese all game long. And so I think that was a positive to see. So I think from the fact that Thursday game, you saw them kind of weather that storm, as I talked about, and then Saturday, to just see them kind of demoralize a team, steal their spirit the way a 4 seed should steal the spirit of a 12 seed in the NCAA tournament.
Purdue destroyed these guys. They only won by 14, but it
could have been 30.
Yeah, oh yeah, but they destroyed them. And they turned the ball over 19 times. That if they play a cleaner game, that's definitely a 30, 35-point game, just because if they're protecting the ball, they're getting more points.
Did anybody else, I want to ask you guys this. Usually I'm the one that fields the questions here, but I'm going to ask this because I had no idea. So I understand it was like a 14, 16-point game, whatever the score was. But McNeese was turning Purdue over, and there was a minute and a half left, and Will Wade just kind of called off the dogs. Did anybody else find that weird? I understand if it's 45 seconds left, but I'm a minute and a half is a lot of time. If you knock down 2 threes, it's an 8-point game. And the way that Purdue was turning the ball over, now, I understand it was just weird to me because I remember looking over to the person sitting next to me, are they waving the white flag? They've gotten a lot of turnovers. And it was just kind of a weird thing. I still don't think they would have won the game. It was just an odd time to me to wave the white flag.
Yeah, normally it's about 35. If you're double digits and 35 seconds left, you're like, okay, we're cooked. But yeah, I noticed that it was kind of early, but I guess I didn't really I didn't fully think about it. I just thought, well, this game's over, and I started doing something real quick and looked up and they were still running it. But Grant, did you notice it?
Yeah, well, I think at the under 4, it was still a 20-some point game. And then in a matter of a minute and a half, 2 minutes, they chopped off about 10 points from that lead. So if they kept that pace, with 30 seconds left, they could have had it down to 4 or 6. But I agree because again, in that minute and a half, 2 minute span, it was wow, they have really chopped this lead down. It was making me a little bit nervous. And then, I kind of noticed the same thing where they felt like that desperation wasn't quite there, like you would have expected in the last minute and a half.
So I know that Houston's going to have a better, and we're not previewing Houston, but I know Houston's going to have a better punch than either High Point or McNeese. But with the way Purdue was playing to get their legs under them, I really do feel that easy first 2 rounds, whatever. I don't care. People were picking Purdue to lose to both of these teams. But my point being is they took both of their best punches and still was able to either A, maintain a double-digit lead, or B, blow it from 3 back out to 8 to 9 points. Is it am I crazy in thinking that Purdue has a shot in this game against Houston?
No, you're not crazy. I would still put it relatively low.
I don't disagree.
Yeah, just because of the thing. Now, here's what I'm going to say this, and I'm going to give you something else here too. So, like a lot of times in the past, there's been some Purdue teams that's like, well, if they're not scoring, maybe they can get their defense rolling. Like they can play really well. This team can't play defense really well. So They're going to have to hit shots. Like I think their defense has played better the last 2 games, but there's no doubt in my mind, Houston doesn't turn the ball over. They average like 9 per game. I think they're top 20 nationally. And their defense is outstanding. So to me, like it comes down to making shots. Now, what I will say I think is a positive in this scenario is we saw a lot of hesitancy from guys like CJ Cox, Jakari Harris, Miles Colvin, Camden Heide in the regular season where they would catch the ball wide open and they wouldn't shoot. And you're just like yelling at your TV screen, like just shoot the ball. There was no hesitancy whatsoever in those last 2 games. Like those guys were shooting, whether it was a mismake, when they got a look, that's what they have to do against Houston because you cannot pass up a good shot to get a great shot because you're not going to get it. You got to take the good look when you have it because you're probably not going to see it again. It's going to end in a shot clock violation or a turnover or a terrible shot, which might as well be a turnover. So I think that if you're going into this game, these guys are not going to be gun shy. I don't think. Now, if Houston dictates pace and, kind of messes with their mind a little bit, maybe some old habits come back. But I don't think you're crazy. I just think I've explained it this way many times. Like I think Purdue's going to have to play a damn near perfect game to beat Houston, but it's not impossible. If they play the way they did this last weekend, I think they're capable of it.
Yeah, I don't disagree. It's not a great chance in my mind, like a percentage wise, but the way Purdue has played, they've been a legitimate top 10 team in the country.
Yeah.
So they are capable of playing at that level. And to play a team like Houston, well, they play a solid enough game. They're going to have a crowd behind them too, which Kelvin Sampson's not happy with. But it's because he was at IU, whatever. But I really think with the way they've figured it out, and I think it was something you wrote talking about Coach Painter said it's really hard to build a Big Ten champion basketball team and one that's built to make a run in March. And I think they've reverted, and not in a bad way, or kind of guided their way to where they're similar to the Tom Izzo team that was a 5 seed and ended up in the Final Four.
This has been my argument ever since they had those struggles. Like, how many times have we seen a Michigan State team that, I don't want to say limped, because 13-7 is not limping in the Big Ten. Like, That's still a really good season in the Big Ten. But how many times have you seen a Tom Izzo team just kind of struggle through the Big Ten? You're like, gosh, what's wrong with this team? Because you're used to seeing them at the top, and they finished 11-9, 12-8, 13-7, whatever the case. And then they get to the Sweet 16 or the Elite 8 or the Final Four. And it's like, if you've got elite guard play, which Purdue has elite guard play, you give yourself a chance. And so I think it was either after the 2022 loss to St. Peter's or the 23 loss to Fairleigh Dickinson that Painter went on to like a national radio show, or maybe it was an indie radio show, I don't remember, and basically said that like we're trying to find that balance where we can find a team that's physical enough to compete in the Big Ten and win a Big Ten title, but also have the guard play, and the pieces and the athleticism to compete in the NCAA tournament. I think this team is just built to compete in the NCAA tournament more so than the Big Ten. Mm-hmm. I just think that's fact. So that I'm not surprised that they've kind of found their rhythm here in these last 2 games.
So I want to end the Purdue talk now. Well, we'll talk about it in a vague sense, I guess, with the Boilers, but this topic, I was looking on social media, saw a number, 1,700 plus. The amount of players that have entered the transfer portal on its opening day. Now, most of these beating the record of 292 last year. So
that's insane. That's 8 times.
Yeah. And so my question to you is, what are your thoughts on the fact that it is opening up during the tournament? It's not affecting a ton of people, but we have seen on a team that's getting ready to play in a Sweet 16 matchup against Auburn, Scottie Pippen Jr. is going into the transfer portal, and he's not going to be with the team. What's it going to take for these people to realize we need to do this after the season's over?
Yeah. So that was another question that was asked during the press conference. And basically what Painter said was, you're basically putting yourself up against it. Like, you're really getting into the recruiting issues. So like, I don't know how much 2 weeks, I'm not in it, so I don't know how much 2 weeks really matters that much.
Right.
But it's wild. It's kind of like the same thing with the college football playoff, right? Like, kids were hitting the transfer portal. Bo Prabula, the backup quarterback at Penn State, entered, and they were in the playoff, like going to the next round of the playoff when he entered. So I think it's just, I don't know if there is a solution. Ultimately, I think what the ultimate solution is going to be is, at some point, these kids are going to be signing contracts for X amount of years, and it's not going to be as big of a problem. But like, I don't know what the answer is. This is one that I legitimately don't know, because I think my immediate response is, yeah, just push it back until the end of like, everybody's done playing, level playing field, we're all good. But if Matt Painter's saying something as to why that's an issue, I'm going to believe him, because he's the one that's in the trenches.
Right.
So there must be some sort of logistical timing type of problem where doing it after or going into the Sweet 16 is the most, I don't know, the best path, I guess would be the best way to put it. I don't know. A lot of people have a problem with it, but it seems like that's been the path of least resistance, at least among the coaches.
Well, is there a possibility then of, like, you know how the NFL has the legal tampering time period or whatever? Make it that way where these kids can still, I mean, Scottie Pippen Jr. had to decide whether or not he wanted to try to pursue what he wasn't happy at Michigan. Obviously, he wouldn't be going to the portal, but still, the opportunity at a, you don't know, Michigan's playing pretty well. They could maybe get to the Final Four. He's, and he's got to make that decision as a very young man.
Yeah, he does. This is a tough one for me, because I'm of the old school. I don't have a lot of sympathy for these kids.
No,
they're getting paid a lot of money now, and they've made a decision. They made a commitment. And so to me, if your timing's your timing, like, you've made that decision. If it backfires, then so be it. And that's not me wishing ill on them. That's just like life. There's a lot of bad things I've done, or not bad things, bad decisions I've made, right, where it backfires, and you just got to live with the consequences. So I think part of that would be my response to that. So I don't feel like these kids are put into a situation where they have to make a decision too quick. You could just stay where you are and where you signed on the dotted line and deal with the consequences. Like, that's, but
you also have people that are probably putting pressure on them to get them to commit one way or another. And I guess it'd be like me saying, free agency starting in baseball while they're in the middle of the LCSs, and then all of a sudden, you've got, and they're not eligible to play, but they just no longer are there. And I don't know. It's like, come on, we've got too many irons in the fire right now. Let's get the best time of the year out of the way, and then let's do that.
Well, and if you remember what happened, just real quick, if you remember what happened with kind of Michigan when they won the national championship in football last season, they then lost Jim Harbaugh as their coach and started losing transfers. They were kind of at a disadvantage because it took them longer to get into the portal and to hire a coach because they played further on. You got to be careful you don't start putting teams that make it further in the NCAA tournament at a disadvantage when it comes to the portal and to the coaching carousel as well, if you want to go there. But that would be another concern that I have.
Well, I think a lot of coaches are taking this approach. Now, if you ask Tom Izzo, he's not going to give you this answer, because I just heard what he said about it the other day. But there are a lot of conversations being had like these. So let me just tell you this, that Matt Painter knows he has a pretty good idea of who's staying and who's going.
Right.
Like that's just he's not said who, but he has said not so many words. We got maybe a guy or two leaving, and we're looking to bring a guy or two in.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like he said that on a national radio show. He's hinted at that. Whether or not it actually happens, I don't know. It could just be him, kind of speaking in theory there. I don't know, but they've had these coaches have conversations. I think they have a pretty good understanding of who's going to be on their roster and who's not. Now, to your point, Grant, that help them in bringing other players in. It just gives them an idea of what they need to go get. Mm-hmm. So it does put them at a disadvantage that way. But I would say, I don't know if there's much difference. I think that with the way staffs are designed now with recruiting coordinators and general managers and all this stuff, I would bet that in the case of Michigan, okay, let's say Scottie Pippen Jr. is leaving. All right, person John Doe, your job is to reach out to these are the 4 kids I want you to reach out to and see if they'd have any interest during this time. That's just my guess of how this thing is working right now.
We don't know if that's dirty or not either, because there are no rules to this game.
It's all legal.
Yeah, so that very well may be conversations and I guess that's what grinds me the most about this is we're just kind of making it up as we go. But the NCAA could have done something about it so many years ago when they knew it was coming down the road. And I fully, blame the mess of the people that were in charge of the NCAA at the time, because they could have done something.
If if the NCAA would have just changed the rule book so it wasn't last updated in 1964, mm-hmm. we would have avoided, I don't want to say all of this, but you could have taken gradual steps where it's not this tidal wave of everything hitting you at once. You would have kept players and coaches and everybody else happy, and you probably wouldn't have this sort of thing, right? Mm-hmm. Now it's just, I think at some point it is going to settle down, because I think I feel like a lot of the NIL stuff is just really bad business, really stupid business owners doing a lot of bad deals.
That's going to weed its way out eventually.
I think that will eventually weed itself out. Yes. Now that's not to say that it's going away, but I think it's going to tone down a little bit. So it's going to be interesting, but I agree with you. It's just everything is at once, and there's been no plan, no strategy. So you got to try to put the toothpaste back in the tube, and that's damn near impossible.
The one interesting thing that I heard, and I think it might have been Rick Neuheisel and Chris Childers on Sirius, but they were talking about think about how the college sports landscape, but they were talking basketball at this point, has changed in the last 8 years. Because Will Wade and Sean Miller they were fired for paying players. One was Sean Miller was under FBI investigation for paying Ayton when he was in Arizona. Will Wade doing the same thing. Look at him now. That's par for the course now. They were asking Queen from Maryland.
Yep.
What makes you respect Coach Willard so much? And he says, because he paid us the money. It's being laughed at now, but that's how drastic, and that's why I guess it grinds me enough, because that's the change we've went from in less than a decade, and it could have been changed if they would have just done something like you said, adjusted things, and not all of it would have been avoided, but a good portion would have.
Did you guys see the graphic of the Sweet 16 teams and the current roster assembly
where they started?
Where they started and where they are now, and Purdue was the only one with all 5 starters who were, well, I guess if you throw CJ Cox, obviously he was in high school last year, but still all of them started and are currently at Purdue, and nobody else. Michigan State, I think, had 4 players. Duke had 4 players. Mm-hmm. I think somebody had 3 players, but I don't remember who that was. Maybe BYU.
Yes,
but that
was it.
But it could have also been BYU transferring to Kentucky. I don't know how many of Mark Pope's players transferred.
I think the one with Drexel was the one that was, because I think they were side by side by who they were playing. So it was Tennessee right there, and then I think Kentucky was right, and then Purdue, all 5 of them.
Okay, gotcha. So anyway, point is, somebody came out with a graphic of that from 5 years ago, from the 2019, and I don't remember if it was Sweet 16 or Elite 8, but each team had one transfer guy on it. Mm-hmm. Everybody else was just just in the last 5 years, you've seen that mass change.
Yeah. Yeah, great. Got anything?
Oh
else?
yeah, it's just I mean, bringing it back to Purdue, it speaks to Purdue's program, but yeah, like you said, it speaks to the change, and it's going to be really interesting to see how it all plays out. Just to see, and just we see so many of these players that just as soon as they become a little bit dissatisfied with their position, they then decide to jump ship, and it's like, and as NIL kind of settles down, like you guys talked about, are we going to see transfers continue to kind of find a middle ground where maybe the numbers start to drop back, or is this just going to keep going? But I think we live in a world, honestly, with a lot of instant gratification, and it's just that mindset of people just wanting to go wherever they can go to find the best situation possible. And it's like, I hope for the sake of the players and for the sake of the sport that they can start to realize the value of just being a little bit patient and being willing to just kind of be, I guess, just loyal to the program, but also just being willing to wait their turn and see what happens, because it works so well for Purdue and it makes me love their program. But yeah, it'll just be interesting to see how that whole transfer realm starts to proceed throughout the next couple 3 years or however long it may be.
Let's just say it this way: whenever I hear Purdue's talking or looking at a transfer, I trust the coaching staff and Matt Painter have done their homework and they know that's the person. I mean, the last two that they had were absolutely home runs in my book that they brought in, and if he brings in another one that can bring us to another Final Four and national championship, I'm A-okay with it. Because I know he's not building he's not building his roster with it.
I think that's everybody's everybody's concern is like they take a lot of pride in the fact that Purdue doesn't assemble their roster that way. And so it's going to be interesting to see if he can stick with that or if that's going to change on his end too. He gets a lot of kids that are very level-headed, that are high IQ, that so he does the recruiting the right way, but it'll be it's a brand new world and they haven't been hit yet, but that doesn't mean that they won't. And that doesn't mean that they're not going to have to adjust at some point. So we'll just see. I really do think at some point there's going to be enough of these kids where they've made enough mistakes and that message kind of gets out. I could be wrong on that, but I do think at some point it's not ever going to go away, but I think you're going to not maybe see teams that are just that nobody sticks around anymore. I can't imagine that's going to be a long-term good solution for anybody or for the sport.
Well, there have to be multiple full teams in the portal since 1700 hit the portal on day one. That's day one. They've got a 2-week period in there to decide. So, but Dustin Schutte from Sports Illustrated, I greatly appreciate you coming in and talking non-tournament topics, I guess. I don't know, because we talked about the tournament, but we've still got a game to preview on Friday. I guess that's what makes what was Tom Izzo said. One of his players came up to him and said, "Coach, we get to practice on Monday," because that meant they were advancing to the next weekend.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, as long as Purdue's practicing, I'm A-okay with how things are going. So, well, Grant, Dustin, it's been a great one. Grant and I will be back on Friday to preview the Houston Cougars and the Purdue Boilermakers from Lucas Oil Stadium. Dustin's going to be there in person. Jealous right here. But that's okay. But thanks for joining us for this episode of the Boilermaker Lounge. We'll see you on Wednesday.